Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Denali National Park headquarters. The geography in the parks features the world's highest mountain in relief. When assessing a mountain's relief, it is measured from the elevation at which it starts and all the way to the top. Denali Mountain, also known as Mount McKinley, measures 20,310 feet, with the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, reaching 29,302 feet, but only about 15,000 feet in relief. Relief is the measurement of a mountain's height from its base to its peak, but the elevation is the maximum height of a mountain without regard to its base. The area surrounding Denali was formed into a national park and was established on February 26, 1917, as Mountain McKinley National Park. The headquarters of the park is located within the first mile of the George Parks Highway entrance and offers visitors restaurants, hotels, and gift shops. The mountains of this area are covered with alder and willow, but in the valleys, spruce, fir, and birch trees dominate the skyline. Moose, caribou, and sheep roam the trails while they hide from black bears, wolves, and grizzly bears. In the early morning hours of June 4, 1980, 21-year-old Dan Marin and two of his co-workers were making their way across the parking lot. They were employees of one of the hotels that housed visitors to the park and were used to the beauty and dangers the park presented. As the hotel workers walked along the road, they watched two huge moose trotting toward them. These moose were not moseying like normal. They had a sense of urgency in their steps and were continually looking over their own back trail as if something was following them. Now, brown bears are not known to hunt in packs or tolerate each other's presence for extended periods of time. They are usually known to hunt and exist in solitude, except when the salmon run. During this time, the riverbanks are crowded by giant bears, pacified by bellies full of salmon roe and skin. They tolerate each other during this time due to an abundance of food, and this is not the typical condition for their existence. As the workers watched the nervous moose galloping across the road, they noticed that two huge grizzlies emerged from the same location on the roadside from which the moose had come. One of the bears was larger than the other, but they were clearly both grown and mature. Dan and his co-workers knew that the presence of the bears presented a substantial risk to their safety. Most of the time, grizzlies around the park would have little to do with humans, especially when there was more than one person in the group. The tension in the air was high, but the people did expect the bears to offer very little more than a passing interest in them as they loped across the road. Dan and the others stopped walking as soon as they had seen the bears following the moose. They knew that drawing the bears' attention could create a precarious situation, so they froze in their tracks. To their horror, the larger grizzly craned his neck toward the small crowd of people and immediately veered his loping stride toward them. The bears were only about 100 yards away when they initially emerged from the roadside brush, but the larger one quickly closed that distance. The workers grew increasingly nervous as the bear focused its eyes on them while it bounced effortlessly toward them. They undoubtedly hoped the bear would peel off and return to chasing the moose after investigating what they were. But the bear wasn't planning on chasing the moose anymore once it determined that there was easier prey nearby. Like a covey of quail exploding from brush, the hotel workers scattered in panic once the bear got within 20 yards. Dan ran toward the trees while the other two ran in other directions. He reached up and pulled himself into the tree, hoping to get high enough to discourage the grizzly from pursuing him any further. At this time, most people believed that grizzly bears could not effectively climb trees, and seeking shelter there was the best strategy. For the most part, grizzlies do not invest their energy in pursuing people who climb trees. But if the tree has low limbs that allow the bears to climb up, sort of what people would need to climb a tree, then they can climb up and pursue people. As Dan hurriedly pulled himself higher into the tree, the grizzly quickly approached the base of the tree. Now, the average grown grizzly bear stands at around 7 feet tall on its hind legs and can reach another couple of feet higher after extending its front paws. This means that anyone trying to escape a grizzly must get the lowest portion of their body at least 10 feet into the tree to avoid its reach. Dan almost got there, but not quite. As soon as the bear reached the base of Dan's tree, it stood to its hind legs and stretched its powerful jaws toward his lagging left foot. In another second or so, Dan would have been able to pull his foot out of reach of the bear, but before he could do that, the bear latched onto his ankle. The pressure exerted by the bear's jaws drove its huge canines into the bones of Dan's ankle, causing excruciating pain. Once the bear had clamped onto Dan's ankle, it used its mass to prevent him from climbing any higher into the tree. A bizarre tug of war broke out momentarily as Dan fought for his life. This struggle didn't last very long, as the bear used its weight to overwhelm Dan's grip on the tree trunk. In one powerful jerk on his ankle, the bear sent Dan plummeting back to the base of the tree. As soon as he hit the ground, Dan knew he had to protect himself or escape. This bear had run right up to his small group, then pursued him into the tree and even pulled him from its heights. It was clearly not going to be satisfied with pulling him from the tree. Dan scrambled to his feet and was filled with terror, being only a few feet from the massive bear. For an unknown reason, the brown bear ran a short distance away and glanced around. It almost seemed like the bear was trying to find the other people who had fled its jaws. Perhaps it was looking for the moose it was previously pursuing. Either way, Dan wasn't waiting around to find out which option the bear was most interested in. He immediately began to pull himself back up into the same tree. It was only a few seconds between Dan's abrupt landing to the point that he climbed back into the tree. It was possible that the bear considered him as food and was searching for another victim as it glanced around. After looking for anyone else around him, the bear turned his attention back toward Dan. This time, the man had climbed as fast as he could to get away from the bear. He knew better than to wait for the bear any longer, and had to get himself higher into the tree, even if it meant the bear would climb up to get him. As soon as the bear redirected its attention to Dan, it returned to the base of the tree. Again, it stood to its hind legs and reached its jaws toward Dan's ankle. It also placed its paws against the tree, trying to reach him one more time. This time, Dan had managed to get just out of range of the bear's jaws and claws just before it could bite him again. He watched as the bear was just a few inches from reaching him. It repeatedly tried to get its jaws onto his foot again and tried to pull itself higher into the tree. After trying for a short time, the bear reluctantly gave up on his pursuit of Dan and redirected its predatory urges back to the moose. After he was sure the bears had left, Dan and the other hotel workers yelled to locate one another. They nervously emerged from their hiding places and regrouped to return to the hotel. Dan had suffered puncture wounds in his left ankle from the giant bear's canines. As it tugged him from the tree, the pressure of the bear's jaws had bruised and stretched his tissues around the wounds it inflicted. He was taken to the nearby medical center and his wounds were cleaned and bandaged. Dan was able to make a complete recovery from the injuries inflicted during the bear attack. There was no source I could find indicating that the grizzlies were pursued or killed by authorities. The attack happened so quickly, and the bears immediately fled the area in pursuit of the moose. No further action was reportedly taken against the bears. After reviewing the facts surrounding this attack, I have a few questions for you. Even though the bear didn't actually climb the tree, do you think climbing a tree is a safe way to escape a grizzly bear attack? Why didn't the bear kill or maul Dan worse than it did? Do you think the two grizzly bears were cooperating while they pursued the moose? Would the scenario of massive grizzly bears forming hunting packs keep you awake at night? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to Granite Creek, which flows just northwest of Mount Eielson in Denali National Park, Alaska. The creek bed is thick with alder and willow bushes, limiting visibility to a very short distance. In the valley bottoms, the land is flat but quickly slopes upward, with each peak in the area rising over 5,000 feet in elevation. The jagged peaks here are alpine, which leaves them barren of trees. Dull sheep somehow eke out a living in this cold and bleak environment. In the plants along the creeks, moose, caribou, and marmot seek shelter from the elements. Hiding from wolverines, wolves, lynx, black bears, and brown bears isn't an easy task, but somehow they manage. In Denali National Park, roads provide access to trailheads which lead to panoramic views that few human feet had trod. This area is in nearly the same condition as it had been for thousands of years. Many of the animals here seldom, if ever, see human beings, let alone feel a substantial impact from their presence. Hiroshi Tokura was a 25-year-old man on August 11, 1980. He and 3 of his friends were hiking through the park, taking breathtaking photos and otherwise enjoying each other's company and the beauty of the park. As the hikers approached the edge of Granite Creek, the bushes grew thick and tall. The babbling of the creek plays its own peaceful tune as occasional breezes wave through the treetops. The hikers were immersed in the scents, sounds, and sights of Mother Nature's art gallery. Hiroshi was leading the hiking group as they navigated the trail through the brush. As he pushed the willow limbs out of his way, he heard a strange sound only a few yards in front of him. The sound reminded him of a large dog's bark, but resonated in deeper, longer tones. Hiroshi knew that moose and caribou didn't make this sound, but was worried that he might find out what animal does. As soon as he glanced around a willow bush, an enormous brown bear came into view. The bear had already been alerted to the hikers' presence, as evidenced by its woof in their direction. They didn't know enough about bears to heed its warning, though, and really couldn't have done much about it, given their proximity to the bear. From about 6 yards away from Hiroshi, the brown bear's low build and massive musculature easily pushed its way through the brush in an eruption that panicked the hikers. Behind the bear, he could see the brush parting as another animal was fleeing. Hiroshi began yelling at the bear and took steps backward to put distance between himself and the bear. He knew that the paltry steps he was taking away from the bear were being quickly outpaced by the bear's leaps. This is where the record gets a little confusing. Sometimes when people experience a traumatic experience, they do things they do not remember later. One of the hikers states that Hiroshi turned and ran away from the bear, but he only remembers squatting down and placing his arms over his head to protect himself from the bear's claws and jaws. Given that Hiroshi was the closest of the hikers to the bear, he bore the brunt of its anger. In fact, he bore all the brunt. The brown bear was upon him before he could react. Every part of the man's body that was touched by the bear's claws was torn and gashed. Its claws acted like the blades of a giant blender against the man's skin. As Hiroshi's flesh was being ripped apart, the bear bit into his shoulder. It drove its teeth deep into the muscle and tissue surrounding his bones, causing deep cavity wounds and punctures. The bear didn't stop there, though. It switched its attack to biting his back as he crumpled to the ground under the weight of the bear's body. The gashes torn by the bear's huge canine teeth easily ripped through the skin of his back, and pain seared through his body. Hiroshi couldn't help but scream out in pain as his hiking companions looked on as their friend was tattered before their eyes. With Hiroshi flattened out on the ground, the brown bear turned its jaws toward his rear end. It clamped its teeth onto his buttocks and ripped open puncture wounds. Hiroshi was clearly no threat to this bear, but what it did next would make you think it considered him a potent enemy. As he lay on his stomach, the bear turned its jaws toward his head. It wasn't satisfied with injuring the man, as it had clearly done that. It took his head in its jaws and bit down as hard as it could. Its bottom canines ripped into the flesh as the base of his skull, while its top canines tore into the flesh along his hairline. As it closed its jaws, it tore his scalp back and away from his skull. Hiroshi was clearly incapacitated by every means, but this brown bear wasn't satisfied with that. It had to make sure this man would not endanger it ever again. As a final measure to end this very one-sided struggle, the bear opened its jaws wide. It clamped its canines across Hiroshi's face from cheekbone to cheekbone and bit down. His bones cracked and gave way under the bite pressure of the bear's jaws. Crushing his face was the last impartation of violence the bear completed on the man's body. After having his face crushed, Hiroshi lay still. It isn't indicated whether he was unconscious or playing dead, but at any rate the bear had decided he was no longer a danger to it. As it stood over Hiroshi's mangled body, it huffed and panted from the exertion. It stared at him, apparently waiting for any sign of life. As soon as it was satisfied that he was dead, the brown bear slowly walked back toward the direction it had come from and disappeared into the brush. Hiroshi's friends had fled into the bushes nearby. After his cries for help ceased, and they heard the bear leaving, they slowly emerged from their hiding places. They called to each other as they focused their efforts on saving Hiroshi's life. The hikers somehow got Hiroshi out to a location that allowed rescuers to reach him. He was transported to the hospital for life-saving surgery. He would undergo many operations to restructure his facial bones, close his numerous wounds, and clean his gashes. There is no record I could find that indicated the precise number of sutures or stitches the medical teams used to close his wounds, but with injuries like Hiroshi's, they would have to number in the hundreds. His treatment must have continued well past the point that his wounds healed. The reconstruction of his facial bones alone would require several operations and possibly necessitate bones from other parts of his body being transplanted into his face to aid in healing there. Searching the internet proved very difficult to find any further information on how Hiroshi fared following this attack. There isn't any information on what happened with the bears either. It is almost like any information about this attack has been expunged from the internet for some reason. Hiroshi's attack was utilized to help shape policy surrounding bear treatment and avoidance by authorities. In the Denali National Park Bear-Human Conflict Management Plan, more than a few pages were written based on information garnered from attacks like Hiroshi's. Given that the second animal he saw fled through the brush as the bear approached him, Hiroshi indicated that he thought there were 2 brown bears there when he was attacked. If his insights are accurate, then that animal was likely a cub of the bear that attacked him. An attack from a sow bear is usually labeled a defensive attack, and most of the time no action is taken against the bear. Given the bear didn't remain in the area, cover Hiroshi with duff, or guard his body, it was clearly not a predatory attack. As far as the evidence showed, it had not stalked the group and ambushed them. That excluded a predatory attack as well. That leaves the potential that the attack was exclusively defensive in nature. But it also begs the question of why was Hiroshi's attack so devastating? The bear had incapacitated him immediately, and he was not resisting or fighting with the bear. It seems to me that the injuries he suffered were egregious but unnecessary given his behavior. Analyzing the injuries imparted by the bear, note that there were none listed on Hiroshi's hands and arms, even though he used them to cover his head. This indicates that he wasn't reaching his arms toward the bear to ward its jaws away from him. If he had done that, the bear would have mangled his hands and arms in its attack. The fact that he squatted down seems to indicate that he wasn't sure if he should run or play dead. If he had curled into a ball on the ground instead of squatting, do you think it would have led to different injuries on his body? After reviewing the details of this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the other animal Hiroshi saw feeling the area was a cub? Did the potential presence of the cubs exacerbate the aggression of this attack? Would bear spray have changed the outcome of this attack? Could Hiroshi or his fellow hikers have utilized a firearm in a competent manner to defend him? What could the hikers have done differently to avoid such a close encounter with an angry brown bear? I will be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to central Sweden. A small town called Lusdal is the location of a government-sanctioned brown bear hunt. This area is very low in elevation, like the rest of the nation. The landscape here is dotted with ice-cold lakes and ponds that are filled each spring and summer with the snowmelt. Between the bodies of water are emerald stands of pine, spruce, and birch trees. Plants like currant, raspberries, plum, and cherry trees provide tasty seasonal fruits for animals as well as people. Where there is room for them to grow, bushes like willow, alder, and dogwood create hedgerows that hide moose, wild boar, and reindeer, as well as 3 different species of deer. The predators of this flat and forested land include lynx, wolves, wolverines, and brown bears. In northern Sweden, as with all of Europe, brown bears are under strict protection due to government policies that limit or ban hunting altogether. Although this has helped the struggling bears make a comeback in previously occupied areas, a conflict has arisen, pitting bears and native populations at odds. The protective policy is called the Habitats Directive and protects animals from being killed or hunted. It even protects them from being disturbed. However, there is a caveat that allows for the management of animal populations when they may damage crops, forests, or livestock herds. In the northern parts of Scandinavian countries, including Norway, Sweden, and Finland, there is an indigenous population of people known as the Sami. They've herded reindeer here for thousands of years and currently own around 280,000 head through 1,000 different companies. The Sami have a culture that is very compatible with their environment and closely ties their subsistence to the reindeer herds they manage. Every part of the reindeer is used in one way or another according to Sami traditions. Supporters of the concept of sustainability point to cultures like the Sami as perfect examples of sustainability. The tribes have begun to host tourists to demonstrate their way of life and strengthen their rights and ties to the land. As government policies protecting brown bears have successfully shielded them from hunting, the bears have returned to predating on game animals they find in their territory. This has developed into a conflict between the government, the Sami herdsmen, and brown bears. In the year 2022, scientists conducted research linking brown bear recovery and the impact it has and will have on the Sami culture. They tracked a single 13-year-old brown bear sow and found her to have killed 18 moose and 38 reindeer over the course of her life. The reindeer this sow and other brown bears have been killing have belonged to Sami reindeer herders, negatively affecting their ability to live and continue their culture. Seeking a balance between the needs of the Sami herdsmen and the brown bears, the government in Stockholm reintroduced brown bear hunting in 1943, which pared back brown bear population growth to 1.5% per year. The permits issued to Swedish hunters, which allows them to harvest and hunt brown bears, are very few and highly sought after. In 2023, brown bear populations in Sweden had experienced a rapid increase, which caused the government to approve a culling hunt. A historically high total of 649 brown bear permits were issued this year to hunters across the nation. 2 hunters who were lucky enough to acquire brown bear hunting permits were a father and son duo, whom we will refer to as Lars and Anders. On Monday, August 21, 2023, Lars had led his son, Anders, to the forests around Lusdal in search of brown bears. The hunters had found a sow brown bear and were following her tracks as she meandered through the brush. The Eurasian brown bear is not as large as their relatives in the Russian Far East or in North America, so this 300-pound sow was fairly typical of brown bears in the area. As the hunters carefully followed her tracks through muddy meadows, they noticed her tracks appeared to be more recent as they pursued her. They knew they were getting close to her, but the thick plant life limited visibility to under 30 meters in most places. Upon entering a small grassy meadow, the hunters were terrified to see the sow they had been following had turned the tables on them. She was now quickly closing the distance between herself and the hunters at an alarming speed. Anders watched as the sow focused her anger on his father. The young man was only 15 years old and was clearly unsure of exactly what he should do in this situation. Anders and Lars yelled at the bear, trying to force her into veering off and stopping her attack on them. But this sow had other ideas, and tackled Lars to the ground as his son watched in horror. The speed of the brown bear was so overwhelming that she was upon his father before Anders could react. He watched as the sow knocked his father onto his back and pinned him down using her paws. She rapidly bit and swatted him, ripping his flesh in several places, seemingly all at once. Her paws were moving so quickly that it was difficult for either man to see which paw did what during the attack. Anders knew the anguished cries of his father and the damage the bear was doing must be stopped. Anders felt a rush of adrenaline, and that apparently summoned his inner warrior. The young man boldly ran over to the bear and let fly the most powerful haymaker he could muster. The punch landed squarely on the side of the bear's head and was immediately followed by another and another. The battered Bruin was likely confused by the defense Anders presented. Given that violence is an everyday part of brown bear existence, she quickly turned her aggression toward the boy. Watching a brown bear move with speed is a surreal experience. Ask anyone who has watched them gallop across a sage meadow as fleetly as any horse, and they will confirm this. The sow turned on Anders in the flash of an eye and knocked him to his back, just the way she did his father. As Anders stretched his hand toward the bear's face to ward off her shiny yellow teeth, she clamped her jaws onto his wrist. With a single toss of her head, she shattered the young man's wrist, rendering his arm limp and useless in his own defense. As soon as Lars watched the sow leave him and begin moving toward his son, he scrambled toward his hunting rifle. The sow had closed on the hunter so quickly through such dense cover that he hadn't even had time to fire a shot at her. Lars managed to shoulder his rifle despite the gashes in his flesh the sow had inflicted upon him. He carefully aimed at the sow, which was now standing over Anders and preparing to tear him limb from limb. Lars fired his rifle, and his bullet imparted its deadly force on the sow's rib cage. The father's aim was true, and it wasn't but a few seconds before the bear fell over as proof. His son was safe, though injured. As the hunters gathered themselves, Lars pulled his cell phone out and called the organizer of the hunt, Janne Sjölbom. He immediately notified first responders, and the 2 hunters were quickly taken to Norrland University Hospital in the town of Umeå via medical helicopter. During the attack, Lars received serious lacerations to his face from the brown bear sow's swats and was in serious condition in the hospital. Her claws tore big gashes wherever they contacted his flesh. Anders suffered several bites on his arm, and his wrist was severely broken. The damage done to his wrist was treated with emergency surgery. Janne was quoted as saying that Lars was very tough, physically and mentally. He had no concerns about his recovery. Yanni was more concerned with Anders' recovery, given this traumatic experience had occurred at such a young age to the boy. Yanni also stated that it was very unusual for something like this to occur. To him it indicated that something had gone terribly wrong. But that isn't the end of conflicts between brown bears and humans in Sweden's hunting season of 2023. On Friday, August 25, 2023, in the county just to the north of the prior incident, 2 brown bear hunters closed in on a bear they had been tracking. They stalked very near to the bear and fired what they believed to be a lethal shot. The bear took exception to such an egregious turning of the tables. In an ambush eerily similar to the one executed on Lars and Anders, the 2 hunters were pounced upon by the brown bear in thick cover. Both hunters received deep lacerations to their arms during the attack, but I could find no source indicating their names, medical attention required to address their wounds, nor what happened to this bear. This attack happened just a few days after Lars and Anders' incident, and both are indicative of just how tough and aggressive brown bears can be when threatened or confronted by humans. In my opinion, Sweden has a proactive brown bear management plan that has clearly sought and achieved a balance in their population. I could find no source indicating that a hazing program exists to keep bears from human population centers, and annual hunts seem to do the trick. Brown bear populations in Sweden are currently estimated at between 1,600 and 2,800 individual bears. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think that bear spray would have prevented these attacks? Given that bears can cover distances quickly, even in the densest of cover, is a hunting rifle an adequate self-defense tool? Do you agree with Sweden's brown bear population management plan allowing hunting? Do you think Anders will be relieved of his chores after defending his father from a deadly brown bear attack so bravely? I wouldn't even make him do his homework or eat his veggies for a year if I were his father. I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.